Hello and welcome to And It's Live, the history of the Premier League. We are in our third part of four on a look back on season 1993-94, one of the most underrated and unloved of all the Premier League seasons, in my opinion. But hopefully we are setting that straight over the course of this series. And I'm joined, as always, by Adam Thornton. How are we doing, Adamski?
Good, thank you. Yeah, I think as we said last week, definitely underrated, and it's easy to think this was a bit of a procession, but as we will go into, certainly in this show, it was anything but.
Indeed. And David Edgar as well is in the house, as the kids said about 30 years ago. How are we doing?
Well, 30 years ago is very apt for this show. Think of all the references we can get in over the next however many episodes. Before you know it, will be WhatsApp and with the best of them. But no, this is a great season for me to look back on, because you're right, it is undervalued, and in a way, it's sort of like when you really love a band, you tend to not like their most popular songs, because you listen to them a lot when they come out, and then you find yourself more invested in the album tracks, and the ones that aren't everywhere, aren't played everywhere. And it's kind of like that with this season, because it isn't one that gets referred to a lot, despite a heck of a lot of interesting things happening in it. It just doesn't fit any nice, easy narrative of the 90s. But I think that makes it all the more interesting.
It absolutely does. We left off last time, a couple of weeks ago, with Manchester United in imperious form. 11 points, I think they were ahead at this point. They had come back from 2-0 down at Main Road in the Manchester derby late on, starting to just build this aura of a team that just will not be beaten. They just keep coming back. You can't kill them off. We'll come to United, obviously, in a moment. But I want to start with a game, David. I'll come to you first. In the 21st of November of 1993 at St James's Park, where there is a lot of excitement and a lot of optimism about what is possible. And Kevin Keegan is, of course, the manager. Terry McDermott is his assistant, two former Liverpool players. It's Liverpool that visit St James's Park, and they are absolutely blown away within about half an hour. 3-0, it finishes 3-0, and an Andy Cole hat-trick. We gave him all the flowers he deserved last time out, but it's this kind of just blistering form that made him so admired in this particular season. John Barnes spoke afterwards. He said, look, they played well, but some of the goals were suicidal. Some of their play was suicidal. Later on, it would certainly be suggested and alleged in a court of law that it was more than suicidal. It was deliberate on the part of Liverpool goalkeeper and legend Bruce Grobbelaar, because this was one of the games that featured in the sting against him for match fixing and taking money to throw games, create chances, etc., etc. We should say, for the record, that was ultimately not established in court, although it's been one of the most contested outcomes in this period. Grobbelaar said, "Oh, no, I would never do it. I was taking the money to lure the con men, effectively. The money was resting my account, etc., etc." This was not the tightest Liverpool display by Grobbelaar, or indeed, in all fairness, by the Liverpool defence, which is just not functioning. But few were with Newcastle and co in this kind of form.
Correct. And I remember a big thing being made of Peter Beardsley's form for Newcastle. And of course, he had been at Liverpool and almost cast away, going to Everton, of all clubs, which is very much a sign that Liverpool are done with you if they're prepared to let you walk across Stanley Park. But I think there was a sense that he almost stood as emblematic of what Liverpool had done wrong in the transfer market. They'd got rid of the wrong ones. They'd replaced them with expensive, poorer quality players, and they'd kept hold of the wrong ones as well. And basically, it was all of the mistakes that Liverpool had made after being, Martin, pretty flawless in the transfer market in the late 80s, let's be honest, or the 80s in general. I mean, you can go back earlier and the 300 grand for Ian Rush, 100 grand for Alan Hansen. So I think it was his performances, which were superb and eye-catching for Newcastle at this point. Rob Lee as well in that midfield was a monster. Really just proper box-to-box midfielder. Energy, work rate. And I'm doing him down a little bit in terms of skill. There was skill there as well. There had to be to play in that. You had to be able to pass a ball in that Newcastle United side. And he could certainly do that. Cole was at his best. This story was huge. And to put it into context for younger listeners, imagine if a story came out now that Alisson had been charged by the police for deliberately letting in goals for match fixing. Because that was Grobbelaar status. Here was a European Cup goalkeeper icon who'd been there throughout the time in the 80s at Liverpool, was on the turn. Well, I think, if we're being honest, at this stage, he's past the turn. And
absolutely.
But even so, he was an absolute legend. And this is at a time when everybody bought a paper, just about, in the country. And to see that splashed across the Sun, the most popular newspaper in the country, the biggest seller, I think at the time, some 11 million people bought it. And if you know how many then people then see it after that. So the whole country was taken aback by this. And it strikes at the heart of, I think, the biggest fear you have as a football fan is that am I being cheated here as a supporter, as a football fan? We don't like the idea of match fixing going on. Now, we know, Adam and I are big Serie A fans, things like this do go on. It's very difficult to fix a match specifically unless you've got everybody in on it, because we've done live shows with former footballers who had played in Italy, and they'll tell us that, the captain would come in and say, it's a draw today, lads, because both teams needed a point. That's slightly different. That's a cultural thing. Italians, especially back then, they didn't understand, well, if you need a point to stay up and we need a point to win the title, why don't we just both get a point? To them, that's common sense. This is different. This was a man going out on his own, according to the allegation, and not telling his teammates and fixing a match. And it really is, I think, the biggest fear for a football supporter, even a neutral one, that what you're watching is a rigged game. And the allegations hung like a cloud over him, because this was not about... You always heard the stories of, a player in the old Division 4 or up here in Scotland and in the old third division, and things like that do go on, especially even nowadays in the era of betting on a yellow card. There's not going to be a lot of focus on some of these games. So I think we'd be naive to assume that it doesn't happen. But this dropped like a bombshell. And football is a difficult sport to fix because you need to get 22 people. The ball can bounce in a funny way. When you see it, West Germany and Argentina, and we've watched our team, one particular day, Easter Road, where both sides were quite happy with the result with 10 minutes to go and sat back. But this was different. It's such a tough one, even as a fan, to look at and say, yeah, he definitely did it. We've had a kind of similar thing recently with Lucas Paqueta. And you watch some of those tackles, and at the time, you don't think anything. But once the allegation's been put out there, you look at them differently. So it's very hard, I think, to judge it accurately, because your emotions are swayed one way or another. But one thing that was certain at this point is Newcastle were vibrant, fresh. And I remember reading the headlines around about this time, Martin, that Liverpool were the team of the previous decade, that Manchester United and Newcastle and Aston Villa were the teams of this decade, and that Liverpool's time had passed. And it did feel that this isn't a blip now. This is who they are. In the way that we've seen with Manchester United, perhaps over the last 10 years, that you begin to think after a while, maybe they are just this. This was, I think, the first where, because you mentioned on a previous show, at the start of the season, there are people tipping Liverpool, such as the built-in Leicester. This, I remember, being the first of has football moved on? And here's this new, vibrant, energetic, super modern side who are buying players and putting them together in a different way, and they just seem so new and interesting and united with the wingers, and we've spoke about Giggs before as well, and the superstar players. Liverpool seemed old and tatty and tired.
Yeah. Adam, we'll come back to the Grobbelaar story maybe next season, because 94-95 is the season of sleaze and all sorts in England. It really is an incredible litany of offences. But just touching on that from David, a couple of things. A team on the up, I know, right? That's interesting. They have to have that, maybe that landmark game, and they have to have that win against an established team, and that's what Newcastle do here. But the atmosphere there now, English football is one of the reasons why it became so marketable. The crowd aren't a million miles away from the pitch. It's not, separated by running tracks and everything else. It's on top. The atmosphere's big. But even by English standards, St James's Park had something different. It was packed. That's a freezing night. And the place is rocking. It helps when your team is 3-0 up in half an hour and you've got the hottest striker in a league that contains Alan Shearer. But all of this just made it it was so hard to dislike them at this moment in time.
Yeah, I think the Entertainers is the nickname that they had. Just absolutely sums it up. A couple of years later than now, I guess, but I vividly remember the 4-3 game, and that to me sort of summed up what Newcastle were. And it's interesting to see it starting here. Yes, potentially tainted a little bit with the Grobbelaar thing, which we can come on to, and what was insane amounts of money at that time, but take nothing away from Newcastle. We spoke in depth about Andy Cole, some terrific goals, razor sharp, as we said. And I think, team on the up, team that are consistently making bad mistakes. I would imagine it was still seen as a bit of a shock. I don't know what you guys think in terms of the time. Looking at it without... Yeah, the manner of it, I guess, but looking at it sort of dispassionately, and I guess with the benefit of hindsight, not really surprised, because that is one of those seminal moments for sure. It's almost like a change. I know Newcastle don't really go on and they don't go on and be a force at all, really, but there is a bit of a seminal moment there where we're young, we're fresh, we're entertaining, we're scoring lots of goals, we're everything that you used to be, and you're now not that, and you can't get back to that because too many bad decisions have been made. So yeah, I would define this fixture a couple of years later, but certainly you can see it coming here for sure.
Okay, we'll come back to Liverpool later on in the show. Manchester United then, as we said, absolutely looking invincible domestically. Huge disappointment and being knocked out of the Champions League by Galatasaray. This period of time that we're covering today, up until the start of March, will end in a defeat, spoiler alert. But it is unbeaten through this period. But Adam, it's win, draw, win, draw, win, draw, win, draw. It is so fragmented with a lot of these yellows. If you're ever casting your eye over a grid on Wikipedia, for example. Let's talk about some of those at the moment. There's a weird 0-0 at home to Ipswich. And then at home to Norwich. This is where they started that campaign, of course, at Carrow Road. They're ahead twice. They're pulled back twice. This is Norwich just before Mike Walker disappears, which we'll come to in a moment. And then Newcastle, Adam. They go to St James's Park, and Cole's done it again, but they find a way that Liverpool simply had no idea of finding, and it's Paul Ince who pops up with an awful lot of important equalisers and winners in this season. There's three. We'll come to a few more in a minute, but it's when it comes to it, especially the one at Newcastle, for example, you're like, well, we got a point. We could have lost that, and that could have sent us into a bit of a tailspin, but we fought back. We've got that mentality to come back when this place is going absolute banshee. Or does it tell you there's maybe something in the post here where we can't kind of live on the edge like this. At the time, it's always a difficult one for football fans to make sense of, and their hopes and fears are probably just projected onto a 3 or 4 match spell like that.
I was just going to say that, looking at it in hindsight and everything you know about Alex Ferguson's teams and Fergie time, it's very easy to look at some of these games and say they're a good point. More than that, really. You think the Villa game right after this, where Cantona scores very early, and then it's late goals and scrambling a draw at home to Blackburn as well. Very late on as well. Hindsight kind of clouds everything, doesn't it? At the time, you can imagine, particularly because what are they at there? What are they at by the time the that Ipswich game comes? It must be something like 12, 13 wins out of 15. They've been top, as we said, since match day 4. And yeah, I think it's natural coming into this festive period, basically that month, 5-6 weeks. They are unbeaten, but there's 5-6 draws within that. I think it's natural to think it is a little bit of a wobble. Obviously, we now know, got the benefit of hindsight, that they come through that festive period, they manage it, they come out the other end, and then they have a pretty good run going into the sort of late winter, early spring, as they would always do. So yeah, I don't doubt at the time there was a bit of, not sure. I mean, we won the league last year, but we could quite easily have lost it. There was a couple of scares on the way. So yeah, I think ultimately you're right, Paul. It's huge for them this season, popping up with lots of good goals. You've still got Bruce in there as well. It's always good for a goal. Not quite where he was in terms of the goal scoring exploits. There's just a lot for them. I think they've got a lot of options. Terrific Ryan Giggs free kick round about this time as well. You know what way it's like, if someone doesn't do it, there's 3 or 4 there that will be able to step up and make the moment. You wouldn't think now, looking back, I wouldn't be thinking Paul Ince was scrambling in injury time winners every few games, but it's just how things go for a team that get the bit between their teeth, I guess.
Davey, one of those other draws, and there are a few more, we could probably do a whole show on some of these draws, is Boxing Day. Adam's mentioned it already. Blackburn come to Old Trafford. The better team actually by some distance. A good game, good tussle, but Blackburn Rovers are the better side. They're ahead, and as Adam said, Paul Ince gets a goal 2 minutes before then from a corner that almost certainly wasn't a corner. It's a goal kick, and things like that obviously just kind of build into the narrative. But United are rattled here, and I remember vividly as a very young boy going to a football match, and for the first time seeing a player in an opposition team that I wished played for my team. That was Kevin Gallagher for Dundee United in a Scottish Cup quarter-final at Ibrox. It was a draw, and Rangers won the replay, but he was unplayable in terms of that pace and lightning touch and everything else that you want from a kind of young player. There's shades of that youngster here, David. He runs through. Again, it's just that pace that no defender likes. Certainly English defenders in 1993 do not like. And the finish is just impudent. It's so cool. And a wee bit like Newcastle, we'll dig into some of the Blackburn results in the next part of the show. But they went there and they punched. And again, that's something that just tells you there's something brewing in this league, that you're just going to get stories year after year.
Yeah, 100%, because Adam nailed it there. This is not a dynasty that they're taking on yet. This is a good side, Manchester United, who have been in the upturn since that cup win in 1990. They've been winning cups, and then they were close, but they didn't win the league. Then they won the league. So they're a good outfit, but they're not legends. They're not what they would become. I would sort of compare it to maybe when you were playing Mancini era Manchester City as opposed to Pep era Manchester City, where they carry a lot more history and weight behind them when you visit the Etihad. Gallagher was a talented player. I mean, you and I, Adam's way too young to remember, but we remember as school children watching him for Dundee United take apart a Barcelona side that included Mark Hughes and Gary Lineker, and winning home and away against them. And injuries did them a lot, because back then, one way that was sort of okay for centre-halves to stop a player like him was to kick him really hard. Yes, maybe it hurt him quite badly. And he suffered for that. And he also suffered. Medical science has come on a long way, mate, but we still haven't, how to players who rely on their hamstrings from picking up awkward hamstring injuries, and a pace merchant like Kevin Gallagher does. So he would be in and out of the side at times. But when he was fit and when he was firing, he was a very good player for Scotland during this era as well. And I think it identified a weakness that United had that wasn't really addressed. I'm going to go so far as to argue maybe up until Rio. And I think the absolute apotheosis of it comes in the Nou Camp when Romario, a pacey number 9, United centre-backs over the years, they were great. They could do physical confrontations, and domestically they had to do it a lot. They were usually quite good footballers. Pallister could pass a ball. Later on, Jaap Stam, Ronnie Johnson could pass a ball. But direct, blistering pace could cause them problem. And I think I remember one of these great 90s names, Paulo One-Shop, ripping them to shreds. At Old Trafford, because there was obviously United are pushing up and there was space in behind, and this unknown Costa Rican and it was an issue in there. And I can understand it, because, look, it's great if you can find a defender who relishes a physical contest, because you're going to get that in that league at this point. There's no point in having a centre-back who's lightning quick. But
there weren't many though, Davey. I mean,
there was Des Walker.
Were an outlier. No, Des Walker, pretty much.
Des Walker. That was it. So United, for me, don't really address it, because the next one who comes along, who's quick and can pass and relishes a physical confrontation, is Rio Ferdinand. And we're talking, 8 years really till he emerged, or 4 years from when we're talking about here. Although he was already in this West Ham youth side that Ferguson was eyeing intently, and Harry Redknapp said he would come and say, some player, the boy Carrick, the boy Cole, the boy Ferdinand, the boy Lampard, you're not getting them, Alex. You can do one. But they did struggle with pace. With Blackburn, there was a real street smart vibe to them, wasn't there? They were kind of, for the money that was spent, there was a Bash Street Kids vibe to them. They were hard.
And we'll get to it next year, but it's probably the reason they managed to cross a line that Newcastle couldn't, because Newcastle weren't. Newcastle, for God love them, they did not have Tim Sherwood or
Alan Shearer, David Batty,
or the kind of forwards that
Colin Hendry.
See, just on United as well. Do you think, again, try to apply logic to it, but 6 over that festive period, end of November to mid-January, say, there's 10 games and they draw 6 of them, but they don't lose their lead really that much. So everyone else is like losing. So again, you're wondering, it's not like it gets to in the spring where the lead gets whittled down and there's a bit of concern there. So I wonder if there'll be less panic as well, because I think at one point it was up to 16 points, but certainly I think end of November it's 13 and it's like 12 by the time they get to January. So everyone else is cutting throats too.
Yeah. And of course, teams at the top, they do what they need to do relative to the opposition. That's human nature distilled into sport. But on New Year's Eve, United were 14 points ahead of Blackburn Rovers with a game more and still cruising. We'll pick up how they cruised or otherwise after a very short break. So a couple of derbies then for United to deal with. Leeds United at home, 0-0. Again, another draw. It's on New Year's Day. And then on the 4th of January, they go to Anfield. You know, the game of England and all that, the Derby of England. And And there is a cracking atmosphere there for all Liverpool's woes. There are flares on, and it does feel Titanic. And United are in that black view cam away strip, and they are wonderful. They are just sublime. The 3 up in no time. The Ryan Giggs chip for the second, and if Grobbelaar was on the take that night, then I don't think he was much he could really do with that. It was just sublime. Steve Bruce, the aforementioned, popping up again for the first. It's Dennis Irwin free kick, I think, for the third. And I mean, I had many left backs with a right foot like that in the time before, inverted fullbacks and stuff. I mean, this is modern stuff. They were outrageous, and then Clough gets a couple back, and it's 3-2 at half time, and it's kind of breathless. They're a bit tired. It's mid-season. The pitches are heavy. Blah blah blah. And then Neil Ruddock pops up. Actually, quite bravely. I think he gets an absolute smack as he goes up for that header. I think it's maybe with about 10 minutes to go, and it's 3-3. A couple of points. Again, Adam, they're 3-0 up, and they're still pegged back. They can't put that big run of wins together anymore. I remember watching this in the TV room in my house thinking, fuck me, this league is different from what I'm watching, and it has a level of entertainment that it just has an undeniable glamour that you can't put down, you can't not watch, and games like this just seem to tip it. Of course, they were not all like this, but you had enough of them.
Yeah, just on the Dennis Irwin point, first of all, I think it's funny, the more that we do, obviously we've done the main event shows as well, which are coming to the end on the YouTube channel and the podcast, and there's things happening in the 90s that you just never really thought of, I guess, or you never really they maybe weren't really defined, and I think that's maybe just a lack of not a lack of knowledge. I think that's a bit much, but like a lack of coverage, or a lack of people really talking about things other than that was a good game and they scored goals and this team did that. Because particularly an inverted left back or someone like Dennis Irwin, you would never have thought of that at the time. You never even know if that wouldn't even really be mentioned that he had a right foot, and you never really thought of things in that way. And yes, it can be a little bit more simplistic, but it also just shows you that these things were happening. It's just people have now cottoned on to it a bit more. They've named things, and people really against it. But it's just funny to see how these things were just happening anyway. I mean, that type of thing is...
It's a British thing, because if you watch the Serie A coverage at this time, you would be and the people they had on, Martin, you'll remember, were different. You didn't get Don Howe commentating on domestic games, but there he is in Serie A. Now, why is he doing Serie A? Because he was somebody who was comfortable discussing tactics, why a team was doing something. Colour commentary in this era, with some notable exceptions, Andy Gray being one, was literally they would repeat back what the commentator had just said. So he would turn to his expert, his ex-player, who would say, and you see here, he gets wide, beats his man, puts the cross in, and the striker heads it home. And it's like, well, yeah, I've already seen this. Your pal there next to you has just told me as it's happened. But you're right, there was this reticence to discuss it. Now, somebody like Ferguson was a tactician, right? I mean, always had been. And just because, as you say, that we didn't give certain things names didn't mean they didn't exist, didn't mean that they weren't happening. By this stage, we're going to come to the Wenger era soon, when he invents pasta and revolutionises English football. But the idea that he brought tactics across is nonsense. Already at this stage, teams they have game plans. They have ways to. How many times have we been watching highlights from these seasons already? And there's somebody playing as a number 10. Now, it wasn't called a number 10 then. He was in the hole or just off the striker. But because this terminology that was in Europe that, it was being discussed there, that we were a little bit, there'd be monsters whenever we heard about it. It's just came over, and maybe that's part of the globalization of the game, because with the amount of footballers who play all over the world now, and no league is dominated, no major league is dominated by players of that country. The terms have become internationalized, because, I mean, some of them are even direct lifts now. You get Trequarista or Enganche, for example. You get terms that actually just get lifted wholesale from another language and brought in, because they are, we know what they mean because we've seen them.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely correct. United would do, I've seen this United team line up with inverted wingers. That he would change. Yes, Giggs played on the left, Sharpen or Kanchelskis on the right. But I've seen them start games where they've done it differently because he wants them cutting in. It's just nomenclature, and yet still we get people in the UK who rail against this terminology as if it's somehow corrupted our game, when it was there. It just, we gave it different names.
I would agree with most of that. Is there an exception, Adam, about the 10? Was a lot of that happening? Did we have anything like a trequartista, sorry, that until Zola, for example, in England? Did you have anyone playing exactly that kind of way? The two up top wasn't completely big man, wee man, meat and potatoes, but I'm not entirely sure English football had anything quite like that.
I think it really needs to be properly in your face before people notice it, and I think that is the thing for me. Yeah, we can go back and we can talk about someone dropping deep and someone being the target man, but until it is and let's be honest, something exotic, something glamorous, and something that works, I think is the most important part of it. Particularly, it seems to be for British football culture. Because David's point there about Wenger is really, really interesting, particularly when you think about two clubs and managers that we're going to come on and talk about, Glenn Hoddle and Chelsea, Ozzy Ardiles and Spurs. The idea that Arsene Wenger brings tactics or modern style of play to England doesn't really tally up when you look at these guys. I think the big issue there is that one of self-promotion and one of that didn't really work because they never won anything type situations. So
and also he can do it because the media will accept he's French, and he had that interesting background anyway, so they'll accept. The Professor was his nickname. They'll accept it from him. From meat and potatoes British people, they don't want to hear this. And there's this fear of it. But Martin, I will go to my grave arguing that Peter Beardsley is a number 10, and I don't care if they're calling it a 4-4-2. It's a 4-4-1-1. Look where he plays.
That's the only one that, not in Newcastle necessarily, although he did. It's more that Liverpool team 87-88 with him and Aldridge that wasn't quite the kind of Lee Chapman, Rod Wallace kind of thing. But Cantona takes that on, right? Because he is going to play between the lines, and that's part of his success, isn't it? It's part of his iconic status that he not only is he brilliant and big game player and charismatic, but he is doing things differently that, to be fair, not even Beardsley could do, because he lacked that aura and that kind of presence. But yeah, that Liverpool side 87-88 is probably the only one that I can think of off the top of my head. We didn't prepare to have this discussion tonight. That probably did have anything like what was going on at Milan, for example. But
it all comes back to.
I would accept the general point that things were there. They just didn't
Tony
have names,
Woodcock.
and we hate names.
Nottingham Forest, Tony Woodcock, Nottingham Forest, Arsenal.
Yeah, maybe.
I think it all comes back to that point where
another show on this, but
yeah, well, it all comes back to that point where if you don't win, people don't care what you're doing, what you're trying to do. If Arsene Wenger comes and does everything else the same, but potentially there's margins and they don't win a title or whatever. Nicolas Anelka gets injured, something like that. He's a funny Frenchman with these stupid ideas coming into British football. I think we apply a lot of hindsight to things, because some of the stuff that Glenn Hoddle is doing here, wanting to make Chelsea Ajax on the Thames, all that sort of stuff, the investment and the appointments to youth team coaching structures, modern backroom academy stuff, all the sort of things that come with Glenn Hoddle, doesn't get any credit for, because he wasn't very good as the Chelsea manager overall, and didn't get enough time, or didn't give himself enough time by winning things, I guess, to properly embed it. So all these things are there, little acorns of it. But for me, certainly, as far as I think British football fan psyche is, nobody cares unless you've won something to back it up. Then you can call things whatever you like. It was even the same with Guardiola when Guardiola appears, and then that first season, like, well, we'll see how he does here. And you're like, right, he's got a decent track record. I think he'll be fine. But it was like, let's wait and see if he can actually do it in England.
It's wet Tuesday night in Stoke syndrome.
Yeah, it's all that stuff. We'll come back to Hoddle at the end of the show, because maybe winning stuff isn't that important. Maybe just getting to a final and beating the champions twice in the season will do in terms of grabbing headlines. We'll finish up United again for now. Sir Matt Busby dies, huge legends of the club. They beat Everton, I think, 1-0 on that day after. They do get a few wins together. Another draw is a 2-2 at Upton Park, where they go ahead, but they're pulled back. And yet again, David, is Paul Ince, of all people, in that fixture to pop up late. I mean, it's another 87th minute. I'll just check some of the numbers around this time. 87th minute equaliser there. He has 88th minute equaliser against Blackburn, 2 goals against Villa, 89 and 90. That one at Newcastle's in the 60th minute. But such an important player, such a good player, and I could develop a theory on this. Doesn't get the love because I just don't think people like him either at the time or since. As a character, as a personality, and as loads of players out there, both present and former, whose career has a lot of lighting because they are so brilliant on television and they speak very well and they're so colourful. He was a difficult guy, I think, to be around Ince, but he was a stunning player around this time.
He really was. But you're absolutely right. He doesn't come across as naturally likeable in the way that some people do. And that's not a criticism of him. It's just it's a gift some people have, that they have a certain type of charisma. The British in general, I think, I remember years ago, Chris Eubank Sr. saying that it kind of annoyed him that he wasn't loved in Britain and Frank Bruno was. And his point was, well, he's a loser. I'm a winner. But in Britain, we prefer the sort of plucky underdog. And I think he might have had a point there. And Martin and I are big snooker fans, Stephen Hendry, winning
Davis.
Machine. Steve Davis, people were either boring and they preferred Jimmy White to him. And I think there was an element of that with Ince, but he's a super player. I think in terms of all these goals, there has to be something to it, right? That's not just coinkydink. I think that clearly this is a guy at that stage of the game who is moving into different positions than he's taken up throughout, because they're not as concerned, I suppose, about locking the back door, at which there was nobody better. I would say in the league, certainly, but he's in the top 5 in Europe, and there are some great defensive midfielders kicking about, especially in Italy at this time. But in terms of keeping the back door locked, Ince was superb, disciplined, in a way that not all English midfielders of his generation were. That they did like to go box to box, and they did like to be involved in all aspects of play. Ince was content to do what he was very, very good at. But you're absolutely correct, because I remember a few times also in his Liverpool career, he'd get chucked forward late on in games and get goals. A famous one against Manchester United, for example. So he maybe had that ability. I think in modern parlance, we'd be saying he's a peerless 6, but you can use him as an 8 because he did have that ability. But at anchoring that midfield for United, and it was really only when Ferguson felt that he'd allowed the persona to overtake him that he got rid of him. It wasn't to do with his actual playing skills. But Ferguson in his book says that actually what happened is, and then said, "Oh, I'm not going to do that anymore, that discipline. I am going to be box to box. I should be an all-action midfielder." But when he specialised, then he was superb. And he goes to Inter. And what's funny is he does that at United, and it costs him his United career. There'll be some other aspects that Ferguson always is his version of the truth. But he goes to Inter, Adam, and you know, I've watched a lot of his games for Inter. And he sits and he plays. So, you know, it's strange. The thing he was reluctant to still do at United, he goes to Inter, which at the time is still considered the best in the world, and does that role and does it superbly.
And I guess he, with Keane, Adam, they can share those roles, right? Because both are equally good at shuttling. Both can pop up with a goal. Both can hold a bit of a defensive line. And if you've got that kind of combination in midfield, it's like, right, give me the next 10 minutes. I'm going to try and kind of find something because we need something. And just two excellent players, I guess. But yeah.
Yeah, so I think that really helps when you've got the two excellent players, like you said. Even later on, Keane's goals. I mean, it is easy to fall into the trap of Roy Keane, defensive midfielder, Paul Scholes, attacking midfielder. There was not that it wasn't the case at times, but there was an understanding that develops where I'll go, he'll cover me, vice versa, and we'll have a bit of time in the game. Maybe the game needs a bit of energy driving forwards. Maybe it needs a bit of guile, and you just sort of work it in that way. And I think it was the same here. I think I sort of get when people say we've overcomplicated things now and players need to be in this phase and that phase. I think ultimately, if other teams are working in that way, then you yourself have to adapt. But really, 9 times out of 10, the central midfield of Keane and Ince should be able to dominate most teams in the league.
I mean, it's a perfect distillation of what it really should be. You have an overall structure, you have an overall plan, but you trust professional adults to make decisions in a live game. Football's a fluid sport. It's not like baseball or cricket. It can change and turn over very, very quickly, and you need decision makers. And that's again why every good manager has managers on the field. They will make decisions. They will say, we need to do this now. We need to maybe hold for 5 minutes or whatever that may be. And yeah, United had plenty of them. They reach the League Cup final by the start of March and batter Sheffield Wednesday's 2-leg semi-final. Of course, they win 1-0 at Old Trafford, but absolutely horse them at Hillsborough. This again a Sheffield Wednesday side who were in the 2 cup finals the season before, and that devastating wing play in Chelsea, I think, was outstanding that night. And they got into Carrow Road by this point in the FA Cup and won again. I think United at this point are 5-1 to win the treble, the domestic treble, and still obviously a lot of games in the FA Cup to play, but that's kind of where they are. We will pick them up again at the very end of the show, but we've got loads of quick hits and a little look at Hoddle and Chelsea to get into after the break. Some quick ones then, David. We have to mention it because it happened. Harold Kendall departed Goodison in a bit of bother. Mike Walker was the choice. He had to be the choice. Norwich are ripping trees up everywhere, both at home and famously in Europe. And it on paper makes perfect sense. And, well, it won't overall. But he does get a tune out of them early enough, I think it's fair to say. And there are signs, there are other signs of maybe what's going to happen, but there are signs of, right, we've kind of made the right choice here, but an odd man.
In much the same way as the set person for an insult of a Prime Minister for 200 years was Lord North, that people would say the worst Prime Minister since Lord North. He was the base. Mike Walker is that in Everton managers. When Everton fans want rid of a manager, he's the worst manager since Walker, is a fairly common refrain. And Everton go through a lot of managers, so it gets dusted down quite frequently. But you're right, at the time, this is all hindsight. At the time, it just looked golden because he wasn't young. So there was a sense also that you weren't bringing up a promising young manager. That, okay, he had only been a manager for 3 years, but he'd been around the game for a long time, and he was experienced. And his Norwich team had also played good football, and that is important to a side like Everton at this point, who, you know, are still part of the Big Six. Just had a couple of dodgy years, is the feeling. You know, you're only 5 years on from a title at this point, or at the start of the season anyway. So I think that there was a sense that he will come in and he, you know, there's some good players in the squad and they've been underperforming. And initially it looks like that as well. Initially it does look, because that's what he's doing. But then when the wheels come off, and spoiler alert, they come off, his manner then actually showed that here was an inexperienced manager who hadn't gone through a spell like this in his career. And suddenly he's going through this spell for the first time in his career publicly at a club where at the time there are still a lot of eyes on and a lot of attention on. And he didn't do himself any favours. He was brusque, he was arrogant. He referred a lot. This is something managers do at the club. The three of us, but we've recently gone through with the manager who would talk a lot about his track record. It's not that impressive. It's not enough to always tell you you're not Pep, basically. You're not Sir Alex. And he really annoyed the Everton support. He really annoyed the Everton players as well, who found him quite unpleasant to deal with. He was one of these managers who, after a bad defeat, would sort of blame the players. Why are you doing this to me? Rather than help them to get better. And I think it is interesting that his post-Everton career was virtually nil. There are some managers who are very well suited to the club and the time that they find themselves in much the same way as our managers who are good managers who go to a club at the wrong time. Walker was one that when he was done at Everton, he was kind of done because, as I say, he'd alienated players, and that gets about in the game. It's very insular world even now, but certainly back then it was. He'd really annoyed the owners, and at the time the Everton owners are still in the major boardroom discussions that are going on. And he'd alienated the media, Martin, which were hugely powerful. And I remember in particular, I think the Daily Mirror in England, which is more of a big thing than it is for us up here, but the Daily Mirror really went for him kind of quite viciously. And they weren't alone in that, because he'd sort of swanned in with a confidence that you need, but then that will be held against you. And I said it on the show a couple of weeks ago, there is the north-south thing, no matter what anyone says, and Everton fans did not like being talked down to, as they saw it, by this gobby cockney who hadn't won half as much as the way he was going on would indicate. And remember as well that having to get rid of Howard Kendall was painful, right? It needed to be done and everyone accepted it, but it's Howard bloody Kendall. He's a legend at that club. It hurts. You've got to go in and if you're going to come in like a peacock, your feathers better be very sparkly and stand up to a bit of wind, and his didn't.
Yeah, I mean, they beat Swindon 6-2 at home first game, and that's the kind of stuff, isn't it? They do lose at Old Trafford, but 2 wins, 2 draws after that. And at the start of March, Everton are not bad. They're, 14th? And that's, Jesus, they are...
yeah.
9 points off the drop? So everything looks... A-OK. We'll pick up next week just to see how A-OK that has been. Adam, we talked a lot about teams going in big runs, either good or bad. Blackburn Rovers do as well over this winter period. 12 league games undefeated, only 2 draws in that spell. Alan Shearer has 13 league goals in that 12-match run. A few late ones as well. So there's something of a momentum building there as well. We'll touch on them again more next week, but they've come through the pack, and as March comes, they are the only team really with a chance.
They definitely are. Like we said, it's one of those situations earlier on where I know Leeds and Blackburn are there or thereabouts over the festive period, but clearly dropping as many points as United. They start to get the bit between their teeth. I think Shearer we've spoken about on every single show, I think, since we started. They're scoring. I mean, they're scoring goals. They're not scoring loads of goals. Maybe that's slightly unfair, because they are surrounded by Man United and Newcastle, who are scoring a lot. But for a team like Blackburn, they are scoring goals. They've got that firepower, if you like, with Stuart Ripley, even like Jason Wilcox, and just to get there and get forward and create things. I liked the team. I thought it was really. I was really surprised, actually, I have to say, when they kept the pace. I guess because it was the big criticism the year before, wasn't it, for some of those teams that they never really whittled down, or they never really took advantage of their opportunities. So there's a lot in this season, I think, particularly as well when you've got the Roy Keane saga that we spoke about last season as well. That can play on minds, I think, when you're getting into the nitty gritty of a league. It's yourselves and a promoted team, for want of a better phrase. I know Newcastle weren't really playing it up against this giant of English football that are buying all the best players and scoring the most goals. So I think they deserve credit for that run, that amount of points that they managed to amass at the sort of start of the season. I mean, there's a run in January where I think Shearer scores a double every other game, pretty much. Absolutely on fire at the start of 1994, and obviously goes without saying he was hugely influential for them.
David, maybe one for you. 92-93 on BBC Radio 5 Live, which was newish at the time. Very, very cool and popular. Danny Baker, Danny Kelly on 606. 606 still going now, with, I think it's fair to say, presenters of a slightly lower calibre. But they had a show called Fantasy Football League, which fantasy football in Britain has just kind of taken off. It's been an American thing for some time, and using that format, bit of humour, and picked up by television in this season. And in January 1994, they take that format to the TV with David Baddiel and Frank Skinner in a kind of mock-up version of their own flat in London, which they did share at that time. Angus Locker in the kind of weird stato in the corner in his dressing gown and jammies or whatever it was he wore. And they would have, it was basically a celebrity league, and they would get two celebrities on to talk about their team, their picks. But it was on a Friday night. It was edgy. It was funny. It did show football, not in a new way. St. Greavesy kind of opened that path in the mid-80s to an irreverence around football when you just didn't have it. You had the schoolmaster Bob Wilson, or basically Brian Clough fighting with people. That was your choices of football coverage. So this kind of irreverence and humour and laddish, blokish banter was absolutely perfect for where Premier League was and where the country was. And this, not the start of irreverence, but certainly the start of football complete acceptance into the mainstream, crossing over with comedy and music and just cool. And it was for teenage boys anyway, and I'm sure much more besides.
100%. I was 17 at the time, and it was, can't miss. I was a student, and it was one of the few things that would get us at the pub early to go back to the dorms and watch. I think that, again, it feels zeitgeisty, and the reason that it does is it's part of it. I remember in the early 90s, the comedy is the new rock and roll was a thing. So it was getting into music mags, and then you were getting people like Newman and Baddiel, who were
playing arenas, right? They're playing
Wembley. The first comedy, but they were they weren't the comedians of our parents. They were ours in the way that 10 years earlier.
Got little and large, right?
Yeah, 100%, right. And I remember my parents who, they're not Mary Whitehouse types, but they would sit and watch, the Mary Whitehouse Experience with me. And what do you find funny about this? But in a way, that makes it even better for you when you're that age. But so then the reason I think it's important, Martin, is that the people you mentioned there, even when there was that little bit more irreverence creeping into it, they were still football people. It was still Ian St John. It was still, people who'd been in the game. And there was still very much that we do the talking, you do the listening, right? And never the twain shall meet. And suddenly here were two comedians who were just fans, who didn't profess to be football experts. They were just two people who supported their football team. And they came out and said who they supported, which was kind of unusual because we were still doing the pretense that everyone was neutral back then. We've maybe gone a bit too far the other way now for clippable content. But it was great because it was funny and it took the piss and it didn't take itself seriously. And some of it is genuinely hilarious. Now, some of it has not aged very well, as I'm sure there are a few things that will spring instantly to mind to anyone who watched it back then. There was bullying, or what we would now call bullying of players. There's no doubt that it happened. Famously, Jason Lee, but also Luke Chadwick, who got it for being an unfortunate looking fella. But some of it equally was, for this, I watched a few old Phoenix from the Flames and was in actual tears of laughter at it because they were just, it's the kind of humour you can only do if you love the subject. Do you know what I mean? There's a warmth to it. They could be savage at play, but they loved football and you could tell. But they weren't saying, oh, by the way, we're experts and you're not. They were saying, hi, guys, come in and share this experience with us.
This is fanzine made manifest on television.
Yes,
there was something else. Standing room only, I think, was maybe the season before. And again, that sense of fans absolutely having their own show, not being guests on a show or putting questions to pundits, but just, and that humour, which was, it would not stand up now.
No,
I'll be honest, didn't feel out of order at the time because it was.
It wasn't.
That's what the terraces were like, and their audience was set up from memory anyway.
Yeah,
like a stand, and people wearing the strips of their team, and there was scarves pretty much laid out on these kind of sofas and all that. So it felt very organic and a kind of natural extension of that. You're absolutely right. Some things do not age well. I mean, St. Greavesy being, I do think, opening the door to this. They were pilloried by Baddiel and Skinner. And they had some kind of skit where St. Greavesy were detectives, and there was some issue with Terry Venables, the England manager, and they'd found a key to his office and they were looking for evidence in supposedly the England manager's office, right? And David Baddiel's playing Jimmy Greaves and he's looking at the drinks cabinet and it's locked, and he said, any other keys about? I mean, it's no way to apply now. And then they got St. Greavesy on years later. I think it was around Euro 2004. And my goodness, that is tense television. That is awkward as all hell. It did not work. But that's kind of
the whole thing. Things don't just happen in themselves. And for youth culture at this point, which is a whole, other thing, but we'd come out of Manchester, we'd then gone into grunge, right? And music is the music that we were listening to as kids is now starting to actually get into Radio 1, right? Because Radio 1 are going through a whole conversion with Matthew Bannister at the time, right? And suddenly there's this marriage of so many things that come together in cool Britannia. But football's a part of it. Laddism, Loaded magazine, FHM, girls drinking pints and, getting their chests out at music festivals. But music is suddenly, I remember at the time, as somebody who was a regular concert goer, suddenly the concerts were, instead of being like the old days, 90% men, 10% women, suddenly they were 50-50. Suddenly there were more women at football matches because the whole culture coalesced. And all of these things that understood that this is where it's at right now. Music, football, even politics, you may say, with Blair and the way that he capitalised on it at this point. They all realised that this is cutting edge and they all got involved. And I think that the real, surprise is maybe that it was the BBC, who traditionally a state organisation. But as you mentioned there,
was very like that. Though.
BBC Two,
home at BBC Two for sure. Vic and Bob and that kind of
the whole thing is changing. They're doing it. Radio 5 is a definitive attempt to be different and to open the thing up. So it was a really exciting time. And football, and fair play to the people at the Premier League, they caught on to this and they got involved in it. And so suddenly you had Zoe Ball was on Fantasy Football League talking about how she supported Manchester United. She'd clearly never seen a Manchester United game in her fucking life, right? But she was, she wanted to be part of it. Here's one for you, Martin. Who won the inaugural Fantasy League on the telly? You'll kick yourself.
I can't remember. I want to say Danny Baker, but it wasn't. Nah, of course he did, and he was fucking delighted about it as well.
They pointed out he called up the day that Newcastle, they actually said this on the show, the day that Newcastle signed Festina Asprilla, he phoned their office and said, I want to buy him. He said, that's how seriously he was taking it.
He was brilliant. We'll maybe come back to that later on as well. Conscious of time, Adam, back to the football. That comeback for Liverpool against United at Anfield isn't enough for Graham Souness. Bristol City knock them out the FA Cup, the holders of the FA Cup, Liverpool, of course, at Anfield in a replay. So they needed a second bite at Bristol City. And Souness resigned. I don't think he was sacked. It's a concept that it seems to jar these days when managers just kind of hold out for the payoffs and whatever else. When he arrived there, it made all the sense in the world. We talked about managerial appointments that just seemed perfect. It looked like football. He was going to dominate football management the way that he kind of dominated Europe and the game itself as a player. The game just changed, I guess.
It did, and it shows that not that the manager is becoming less significant at this time, but ultimately it is part of a thing. The cult of the manager piece, if you like. Football recruitment is becoming a big thing here. Money is being spent. Other teams are splashing it about. You see now where clubs don't sell their best players, really, because they don't need to. They're quite happy to keep them another season and hold them to ransom almost. But I think at this point the big clubs were the big clubs per se, and the managers had the ultimate power. That is changing a bit here, and you can see with Souness it just wasn't enough to be the big name to come in and frighten the players. You needed players, you needed to evolve, and as we've spoke about on every show pretty much since we started this, they just haven't. Terrible decisions catching up with them, inexcusable things. Yes, I think you look at it and you think, oh, Graham Souness will get them going, but it just isn't working like that anymore. You need a lot more to fall for you, and ultimately it didn't. And like you said, I think that sums it up. Yes, there's that comeback there against United, but ultimately that's the thing that hurts them the most. And then we get Roy Evans coming in to take over, and he has that three or four seasons, I think, before before the what I look back on now as weirdness with Shearer Tully, because again that's something that you can't imagine selling in the modern day where they come in together. But yeah, terrible for Souness. Obviously, big fan of Souness in terms of his time at Rangers. Terrific footballer. We're going to come on and talk about another terrific footballer who maybe didn't quite translate into football management, or certainly club management. And I think I think this is probably Souness's it is his high point, I guess, in terms of England.
It's kind of weird that that is the narrative, and there's obviously a lot to it that the game kind of left him. It's personality the game left him. You just can't do that. But the things he wanted from his Liverpool players, his Rangers players, not a million miles off what Arsene Wenger would then demand of Arsenal players, because that is shaped by his time in Italy. He's a fitness fanatic. He's the fittest guy in the team sometimes, and he's the manager. He's retired by this point. He runs them off the park, but was just furious that Chippy's been brought on the bus and beers and whatever else. And so there is still this clash in England about professionalism and looking after the body and whatever else, but he couldn't sell it in the way that Le Professeur could.
Exactly. I think you just took the words out of my mouth there. It's promotion is the word I used earlier on, and it's the wrong word, but it's salesmanship. It's players can be in awe of what you've done as a player specifically, I guess. Maybe less so if you haven't really done anything that they would value as a manager. I know he was up here and things, but maybe they didn't see that as worthy. But ultimately, if you can't sell your ideas and you can't get your message across to people because either they're unwilling to change or you're just not able to do it, then there isn't really much that you can do. The modern footballer now, absolutely, will take on board what a manager says probably and do it to the team more often than not. I think back then, you're right, if someone comes in and says, by the way, no tomato sauce or no pints, you'd be like, come on. We've been successful at this club. This club has been built on pints and tomato sauce for 20 years. I'm sure we'll be fine.
No, but you're absolutely correct. And it is the changing of the guard here, because how many autobiographies of footballers have we read from this era that they got to England in the 90s and the manager, they would be sitting on the Friday, look, when's the tactical meeting? The other players are, what? So when are we going to sit and talk about the other team? What are you talking about? So if a big lad up front and, just get and play. And the more that players are beginning to say this, the more that managers are thinking, well, hang on a minute here, I've got to come up with something. And it starts to, and it doesn't happen automatically. There's a very famous scene in a Man United documentary from this time where they're about to play Liverpool and Ferguson's addressing them. And he says, right, McManaman likes to cut in from, on his foot. Watch that. And it shows you them bored, and then it cuts to Schmeichel after. He's gone, he tells us that every time with McManaman, we know. But you would read, I remember Dennis Bergkamp's autobiography, which I would recommend. It's not a typical footballer's autobiography. But he said when he first arrived at Arsenal, he couldn't believe, having come from Ajax and then Inter, the lack of preparation time. And basically you had foreign players coming over and not buying into the British thing of a manager saying, do this. They would say, well, why do you want me to do this? Is this the best way? Let's talk it through. British managers were used to, you're doing it because I told you to do it. So culturally, it's, a melting pot.
Indeed. We're going to finish with the 5th of March, 1994. Manchester United host Chelsea, the only side to beat them in the league, and they do it again, 1-0. Gavin Peacock, the same goal scorer as back in Stamford Bridge. Adam, this Chelsea season is kind of fascinating to look at some of the results. Beat United, beat Liverpool in the early part of the season, and then go on a horrific run of games. There's 11 league games without a win, and only 2 draws within that. Horrendous. Beat Newcastle United that we've talked about already. You don't get a draw against Norwich and Villa. Beat Spurs after being 2-0 down at home and fighting back, and then they go to United and win 1-0. We'll touch on them again next week because they're going to go off to the cup final as well. Hoddle's reputation is going to grow over these 3 seasons. Chelsea's going to be England manager too soon, is probably my conclusion, but there we are. But he is maybe, even though Chelsea are at the bottom half of the table, they'll finish 14th, I think, this league season, but he has eye-catching results, which maybe grab the attention more than the kind of wider pattern. A young coach, a Chelsea, by the way, they are mid-table. They've been in the first division not that long ago, the old first division, or the old second division, now the first division. So maybe it wasn't expected to do too much more than the cup stuff. But what is he doing in his young managerial career around this point?
So I found there's quite a lot here. I found this fascinating. I think if talk about that season specifically, because maybe a lot of what I'm going to talk about will be how he got there and more about how they played rather than the results. I think the cup runs provide, and those big victories that you mentioned probably provide the counterweight to the lack of consistency there. They got, I think, 4 or 5 points less than the year before. So it wasn't exactly as if he was coming in and revolutionising things immediately. But I think it's the cultural impact that I probably hadn't really appreciated, to be honest. I sort of mentioned it earlier on there in terms of what he wanted to come in and do. He is a player, a manager that I find quite fascinating, because back then he was different. He was thinking about things in a different way. And I think you could probably trace it back. I'm sure you can trace it back further, but for me, in terms of where I traced it back to, was his time at Monaco. With Arsene Wenger. And again, there's a couple of little nods there where he goes over there where, as David mentioned, late 80s, early 90s, it is more modern, forward-thinking, culturally, tactically. He goes there and becomes a number 10. If he hadn't went there, there's a wee bit of a moment there where Arsene Wenger might not have implemented something similar at Arsenal, with Dennis Bergkamp being that number 10. Ironically, if he probably doesn't go over there, Bergkamp, who said Hoddle was one of his idols, might not want to play in that position. So there's cool little nods, I think, in a lot of places. Wenger wanted him to play behind the striker, which was Mark Catley, obviously, at that point, but he had never really played there for England or during his heyday at Spurs. So I think that little nod, I think, sums up what we've been speaking about there in terms of the players that go abroad to fit, then come back with different ideas. That being said, I'm still really, really surprised that he ended up at Swindon. I know he had that bad injury and he probably still wanted to play. I think he went to Swindon when he was 33, 34, maybe.
Yeah.
And it is still a bit of a surprise. I think there's loads of great articles and quotes as 10442 talking about how, as you would expect, he was just unbelievable at that level. Legs have gone, of course, probably still recovering from injuries, but just remarkable. Nicky Summerby is obviously, we'll know more from his time later on, but he was a young player at Swindon, and he said he was a centre forward, and he was complaining in one game. Hoddle was obviously he was injuries and all that sort of stuff. He was playing as a sweeper at this point, as he will do at Chelsea, where it's a 3-5-2, 5-3-2 type thing. Nicky Summerby's a centre forward, a young centre forward at this time, and he was complaining because he hadn't passed him the ball, and Hoddle said, "Stop coming short for it." And he's like, "What do you mean? How are you going to get the ball to me?" He's like, "Just go, go, and I'll find you. Just go and I'll find you." And he said, "I did that in the second half, and this ball dropped over my shoulder like you wouldn't believe." He said, "It hardly bounced. It was so good, I almost fell over it." And he was like, "Fucking hell! How did he do that?" And that's in the second division as well. So it's a precursor to, I think, some of the things that we speak about now, where managers are being hired for how they play rather than what they've won. I think because you shouldn't really be getting that Chelsea job, no, to be honest. And it's fascinating that would be happening at the time. Again, these things that we speak about happening now and how it's so modern and things. Well, there you go, 30 years back, the same thing that I've been speaking about happening now is happening then, with somebody who wants to play the game in a specific way with very clear ideas is given a really, really big job on the basis of a year, a very good year in the Championship. So I think that's a really interesting precursor. But again, some of the things that I hadn't really appreciated, I mentioned there, Graham Rick's coming in at Chelsea, and him wanting to revolutionise this and say, right, okay, we do need a youth academy, we do need technical members of staff who can pull all these things together. Neil Bath, who just left the Chelsea academy summer of 2024, was a part-time coach when Hoddle was there, and he speaks about how important he was in terms of how Hoddle wanted to develop this Ajax on the Thames thing about loved Cruyff, loved Ajax, wanted to implement this youth academy and this model, bringing in key positions, key players, key coaches in these positions to really help embed what he hoped would be, I guess, a bit of a dynasty at Chelsea. How much of that he's responsible for moving forwards, you never really know for sure. But certainly some of the coaches that he brought in there have only recently just left, and Chelsea's academy has obviously had such huge success. So all of that type of stuff, before you even really think about the on pitch, was things that I never really thought about, and it was fascinating. I think the big thing he did at Swindon was just be different. If you think about the top division and it's 4-4-2, big man, little man, the leagues below that are like that on steroids. But he's coming in and thinking, maybe I'll try a 3-man midfield. Maybe I'll be the third man, if you like, so I can see the full game. We can get those overloads. Be really, really progressive. So that was something that I just found fascinating, because you think about the guy and you think about the player he was and all that sort of stuff. Hadn't really sort of thought about the ideas that he was implementing and things that would be sort of long lasting. What I do think, and it's a familiar subject, is ultimately having the ideas only takes you so far. There's an element of, certainly this season, and I would argue the next season, there's an element of being too rigid with what you want to do when you just don't have the players that can do it. There's the whole debate that we have about idealism versus realism. I think it's fantastic and it's romantic, and you want to play this way and you want to do the right things. It's not a great squad that you've got, so there's maybe a little bit of adapting that needs to happen there. And he wasn't too great at it, but there is an argument, like I said, if we think about it in the youth academy, for sure there's an argument that maybe he's laying some of the seeds there. But I would also argue that without Glenn Hoddle, we'll come on to summer of 1995 when Ruud Gullit signs. Without Glenn Hoddle moving to that style of play, all that sort of stuff, I'm not sure Ruud Gullit, turns up. I'm not sure he sees that as a place he wants to go. And then that's the catalyst as well, because if Gullit isn't there, is Zola coming? Is this player coming?
Yeah,
I mean,
100%.
Gullit there.
Fascinating.
Someone in '94, but it's that quality that he's kind of looking for, basically, because he can't do it anymore, right? He's going to have to.
It just replaces them. He replaces them in the team, yeah.
And Mark Hughes.
So it's just it's a fascinating little
experience.
I don't know if it's quite a sliding doors, but yeah. Sorry, I don't know if it's quite a sliding doors moment, because it's not as if they go in and have unparalleled success, but you can sort of see some of the little ideas of modern football coming, and it's through Hoddle. But ultimately, as seems to be the theme for this show, if you can't get your ideas across in a consistent way and you don't have the players that can do it, you're kind of limited in what you can and can't do.
Yeah. Just a couple of things, David, on Hoddle. Adam mentioned getting a job that big on the basis of one season promotion. I don't think Chelsea's a big job in the summer of 1993. To be honest, it is not a big club.
Yeah,
it's a club that's been yo-yoing. It's had its difficulties. This is not. It's not remotely in the same planet as the Chelsea that we understand now. I don't think it's a huge jump as that. Also thinking about that, but also thinking a few years down the road, getting the England job, which did feel very, very soon.
Mm-hmm.
But what other English coaches, what other English managers are around that you think are good enough now, but also have longevity, are the future, have new ideas? I'm not sure there are too many. Big Ron's at the end of his time. Guys like Mike Walker, we're going to find out, are a bit of a busted flush. As a coach, as a tactician, so a lot of the English players who would ultimately serve under him in that World Cup say he was brilliant. That England-Argentina game is one of the greatest World Cup games of all time. And you have a manager being flexible, dealing with setbacks, just being absolutely in the zone. But a wee bit like Souness has a personality that is really, really difficult for players to completely get behind. You can't do what I can do in my sleep. And
feels
feeling quite... Yeah, exactly. And it's just this kind of contrast, a very quick contrast, sorry, just on the England thing, but just we're talking about personality types. Venables in that Euro 96 quarter final against Spain. It was 0-0, but Spain had battered England that first half. He wants to make a change. He said, we're going to make that change. And Don Howe, the aforementioned, said, Terry, just a word. And they go into the showers, basically. And Venables comes back and said, no, Don's right. That leaves us more open. I'm going to go with that. Venables is total security in himself. Say, I've got an experienced coach here and in the moment, no, I think you're right. I'm going to go against my judgment. Can't imagine Hoddle ever doing that. The whole nation basically had to scream at him to start Beckham and play Owen from the start and all these kind of things. I know best. He had so many good ideas, as Adams can outline, both on and off the pitch, but such a personality that it just makes it difficult to absolutely all come together. But I don't know who else was around.
There weren't a lot. And we'll talk about it the episode that it happens. It is interesting because I thought Adam nailed it when he said this is something we're familiar with, a lot more familiar with now, which is a club saying we want to bring in this young, exciting, vibrant manager who's got all these ideas. Chelsea at this point were a bit like City were, and I know that now that there's such behemoths, it might be odd for younger. They were sort of more like Bournemouth under Areola, and that everybody quite liked them, Chelsea, but there was also a sort of knockabout thing with them as well, that they were they weren't Arsenal or Tottenham. They didn't carry themselves like that. The Kings Road, the Peter Osgoods, Kerry Dixons, those type of players, Charlie Cooks that they'd had, and they were sort of outlaw glam, but you look at that squad and it's not great. Gavin Peacock, Craig Burley, John Spencer, guys like that. They're solid enough pros. Erling Jonsson's kicking about at centre back. And Chelsea did sort of set we're going to do something that's quite exciting, that's quite glam. Glenn Hoddle is going to come in and he's going to get us playing this way, because there wasn't this pressure to win the title at Chelsea. If they were playing good football, they could live with getting the odd pasting here and there. The ambition level was lower. So to do that, they bring in this coach, and he couldn't have got away with it at a club high. He couldn't have got away with it at Tottenham at this point. But it was about, I want to do this whole club thing. And his reputation as a player had grown really since the 80s, I think. Even in that stage, because there were already articles about how badly England had mismanaged talent in the previous 25, 30 years. And Hoddle was often held up as an epitome of that. And if footballers were robots, Glenn Hoddle would be a master programmer. But they're not, they're humans, and that's where he falls down, because he doesn't have the people skills and management. I don't know him as a human being, he might be lovely, but he doesn't have the people skills and management to be able to do it. But in terms of his tactical knowledge, his understanding of the game, his vision of where football was going as well, he was miles ahead, absolutely miles ahead. But you mentioned there a great example. I didn't want to pick Beckham, so I'm going to basically make sure he knows that he's here under sufferance. That's unlikely to get the best out of him. I'm going to chuck him under the bus for us losing. And then the more esoteric beliefs and things that he had that have been widely discussed. But at this point, Chelsea, I keep going back to that word zeitgeist, Martin. Chelsea were again at the heart. Football's new again, and it's exciting, and we don't want to hire camel coat manager who might come in and get his 8th rather
chomping
than 10th.
A cigar and wheeling wheel, and
we'd rather finish 10th playing this great modern football under this guy than finish 8th under Big Ron, for example. So and we still see it now, and we still see actually that it's still not wholly accepted by supporters. As the week we come to record, Will Still has just been sacked by Southampton. And their fans couldn't come to terms with it. At Rangers, Russell Martin was fired because our supporters were, why are we hiring him? And the club are saying we're hiring this guy for what he might do. Whereas we as supporters are saying, what has he done to have this job? And Chelsea, as Adam says, 30 years ago are doing this. They're bringing in this guy after a year because he's Glenn Hoddle, really. And because he's got this vision, and he's been in France and he's come back with almost like from his holiday, he's come back with, this is the hot new band. This is the record they were listening to in the clubs in Ibiza. This is what they're doing in French football. Again, within 5 years, this is a ridiculous thing. Within 5 years of this period, it's ridiculous to say, but he seemed very cool in 1994, Glenn Hoddle, the coach.
And with good reason, I think it's fair to say. Gents, I told you this season is an absolute beezer, and we are failing to get these shows in an hour. So we'll wrap up there on the 5th of March. Manchester United did have a lead of 14. They now have a lead of 4. The treble's still on. They're still in control. Their challengers are not that far promoted themselves. As long as they can keep the discipline, I'm sure they will be fine. Thank you, Adam.
Thank you.
Thank you, David.
A pleasure as always, guys. Thank you.
Until next time, bye for now. If you enjoyed the show and want to help us grow, please remember to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. On YouTube, search for And It's Live Podcast. We've got new deep dives, drafts and breakdowns dropping every other day.